Hey guys, the Simulator here, re-recording this Magic Lords video because my mic was not turned on the first time. And that was like a 45-minute video, so not in the greatest mood now. Yeah, I'm going to go through all 8 of the big rulebook lores, High Magic and Wandering Deliberations separately. And the one thing just to warn you ahead of time, this is going to be a pretty harsh review, and by that I mean I'm not going to really spend time worrying about the merits of all the different lores. I'm really going to try and focus on just a couple that are like our best choices and more. Ignore the other ones because every lore has some specific situation where it's the best lore, but most of them aren't really worth talking about. Just to remind you, the same rating system I used in my army book review. I probably will end up adding this video onto the end of that. Just a quick refresher, 5's outstanding. It's one of the best choices we can make. 4 is a solid choice. 3 is okay if you have a specific use for it. 2 is bad unless you really have a specific use for it. And then 1 is just don't pick that ever. Okay, I'm going to start off with the 2 lores that we are the most familiar with, and that is Heavens and Beasts. First up, Lore Heavens. On the right side of all these lores, you'll see the spells, like what spells you want to keep, what spells might be worth it, what spells you should drop if you roll them, because the signature is better. In this one, the keeper spells are definitely Harmonic, Convergence, Comet of Cassadora, and Ice Shard Blizzard. Those are definitely the 3 key spells on this lore. The benefits of this lore, it's very synergistic with Light, which is one of our best lores to take on a slot, especially running a Saurus heavy army. Teto Echo makes really good use of this lore, being Lore Master. And especially because you can really, with his army rules, with his Vanguard and types of army that he's usually taken in, Comet is even better. 1, because he can reroll it, and 2, because Area Denial is really nice. Unfortunately, the lore attribute's pretty situational. It's got no real power behind it to make it worth being on a slot. It's pretty much just worth keeping your Skink Priest for dropping Ice Shards and then hoping for either Harmonic or Comet or something that you would want for your army. So I give this a 2 for a Slan and 4 for Skinks. Next up, Lore of Beasts, and this lore is really taken for Wissons and Savage Beasts. Curse of Anahir can be good if you're, fighting a aggressive large block of infantry army like orcs or high elves or something. Amber Spear can be a good alternative to a cannon for us, but they're mainly situational. You're really taking it for those 2 spells. You're really taking this lore for Wissons unless you run a like a Scar Veteran spam army, then you could take it on a Slan to get Savage Beasts. But mainly you will see this lore on a Skink just meant to spam Wissons. As good as Wissons is, with, Strength 5 justifies Saurus, Strength 4 Javelins, everything else, the big problem is you're usually seeing on level 1 Skinks, and it needs a 10, so you need to 3 dice it. So, it's not really that great of a choice. In my opinion, I usually prefer Heavens on my Skinks. Next up is Lore of Fire, and this is usually regarded as the worst lore to pick a level 4 on. And it's really true with our army, because what this lore does well is it spams out Strength 4 hits. And our army has so many attacks per model, and we're all basically Strength 4. We really don't need another source of Strength 4. Where this lore really comes into its own is against things like Troll Hordes and, etc. like that. Flame Cage is a very good spell. One of the big problems, though, is we can just take High Magic, and Convocation is a better version of Flame Cage. If you want it for the Flaming Magic Missiles, take Wandering Deliberations because it has multiple of them. I'm not sure why it says 3. I think that's a typo. It's meant to say 2. Oh, no, I guess Searing Doom is technically flaming. Yeah, the only reason you'd ever really I don't really see any reason to ever swap to this lore, or take this lore, or anything. If you have lore of high magic and you want a fire spell, I would swap to light, because then you could get speed of light. And if you don't, just drop whatever you get for Shem's Burning Gaze, which is basically Fireball. So yeah, this is probably the worst lore for us, in my opinion. Okay, next up is Lore of Metal, and this is the old standby for the Skink Cloud armies in the last book. However, in the new book, Skinks have 6-up Scaly Skin, which is amazing, but it kind of reduces the effectiveness of this lore, because now having Glittering Robe really isn't as useful as it was. If you have an army that doesn't really have any answers for things like Steam Tanks and Demigryphs and Cold One Knights and whatever else, then this is a great one to choose to kind of fill that gap for you. And then you run the risk of running into like Wood Elves or Beastmen or something and just basically trying to spam Enchanted Blades and not really having a use for your Searing Dooms. So this is one of those ones that's useful in this situation. Because of that, it makes it a prime candidate for swapping from high magic. Right, next up is Lore of Life. This was our old #1 lore that every Salon would take. The big problem is we no longer have Lore Master for big rulebook lores. And Aslan doesn't get thrown, he's basically screwed. And one of the big problems with this lore is that there are 2 spells that are not that great. The other 4 are almost required for this lore to function properly, and this signature is one of the ones that is not that great. So you end up with really, really hoping for a lucky roll where you can get 3, 5, 2, and 6, because everything else is just not the best. One thing that is nice is with us having such good characters and so many monsters, the lore tribute becomes kind of amazing. Regrowth on Saurus is somewhat mean, with them being pretty tough and expensive models. You can regrow 50 points of guys in one spellcast. The other big problem is that Slann is not really that versatile, with the only offensive spell being Dwellers, which everybody's going to try and stop because it's so powerful. This lore does have the distinction of being the absolute best choice for Mazda Mundi, because he gets Lore Master of the big Battlebook lores, so he gets rid of that restriction. He's on a monster, so he can make good use of the lore tribute, and he's somewhere that Earthblood is actually useful on because he has no cannon protection, so he can give himself regen to protect him from those cannons. So I would take this lore on Mazda Mundi, but other than that, I would never take it. Okay, next up is Lore of Shadow, and this is a really good one if you think you're going to be fighting high armor, high toughness that our poison shooting can't get through, because you can just wither them and then, or Occam's yourself or something, and then hit them with your Saurus. However, it's not really all that great for a high toughness, high strength army like ours. It's much better suited for elven armies. However, it can work if you have a use in mind for it. It's definitely not a bad lore. Alright, now we get to the really good ones. So starting off with Lore of Death, which I'm probably going to draw some flack for not saying is our best lore, but the next 3 I do think are better than it. The big keepers here are Doom and Darkness and Soulblight. Spirit Leech becomes really, really good if you have your Slann being the Battle Standard Bearer with the, Banner Discipline and stuff. However, in the big main build that I would be using this lore in, I would not want him as a Battle Standard Bearer. Purple Sun is great if you're fighting a low initiative army, and especially if you have a Skink Cloud and you're using Lore of Death. But if you have any Source units anywhere near your Slann, and you roll a misfire, they're all going to die. It's our biggest bane, and it's really risky for us to use. Soulblight is put as like my I mean, Doom and Darkness is put as the #1 spell in this lore for me because it synergizes so well with Salamanders. I mean, in my games where I've used Lore of Death, I hit Doom and Darkness on a big horde, shoot him with a Salamander, kill like even just 3 guys, and they panic off the board. And it is amazing when it happens. In my opinion, the best choice for this lore is to put it on a solo Slann while you're running Teto Echo, because the big benefit of this lore is that the lore attribute gives you extra power dice. However, with just a Slann, you only have 4 spells. It doesn't really matter if you have all that many power dice. The big problem with Teto Echo and a Slann is you've got too many spells and never enough dice to cast them. However, Death plus Teto means you're rerolling ones to cast most often, and you're getting extra power dice. With that combination, you can usually get at least attempt to cast 7 or 8 spells a turn, which is absolutely outstanding, because people are usually going to only be able to block 2 or 3 of those, so there you are getting 5 spells off every turn. That's just absolutely insane. I've wiped out entire armies with just my magic phases with this combo. Any tournaments that allow special characters, this is the one combo that I take to them, is I take Teto Echo, and I take a Death Slann, and I load up on Salamanders, and I run that at them. I love this lore as a secondary lore to Teto, but as a Slann just by himself, it's not the best, mainly because its most important spell is so risky for us. Okay, now Lore of Light. This is my favorite lore for what I consider the standard, like, fluff-wise Lizardmen list. You know, the blocks of Saurus and not that many skinks instead of the skink cloud that is somewhat really popular. I love this lore mainly because while some people go for beasts to boost your strength, I kind of prefer using magic to fix your weaknesses, and getting a speed of light or a time warp, or somewhat to some extent even a Foz, or any 2 of those, or God forbid all 3 of those off on the same unit, especially since all 3 of them can be bubbled. It just, Initiative 10 Weapon Skill 10 Saurus is hilarious. Initiative 10 Always Strikes First Weapon Skill 10 Saurus with 3 attacks each is broken. Rerolling misses on Saurus is absolutely hilarious, and in games where I take this, I usually take a Beast Skink because, you don't have that many light spells. So, I have had it where I have the turn after I killed his level 4, I got Weapon Skill 10, Strength 5, Toughness 5, Initiative 10, re-rolling misses, and -1 to be hit Saurus, which just blew up everything. And it's absolutely hilarious when you get any 2 of those 4 spells off in cohort on the same unit. In addition to that, Net of Amatok is great at shutting down magic phases. Whether you are of the opinion that you have to roll once for every spell you cast or once for the entire magic phase, it's great either way. Most spellcasters are really low strength, so you end up with a 50-50 shot of them getting a magic phase, essentially. The one big loser out of this lore is Light of Battle, because our leadership's already so good. However, depending on the armies that I'm facing, I won't drop it, because I can run a unit of Suicide Skinks in, Conga Line or 3 wide or whatever, end up with like 2 Skinks left, and they hold, and then I can get a really nice flank charge off. So it's still really great. Lore Master would be excellent with Lore of Light, because you are running some risks that you roll, Banishment, Light of Battle, Net, and Foz, and you don't get either speed or time warp, because you really do need one of those 2. The other big problem is you don't have any big horde killer spells like Purple Sun or Final Trans, and really you don't have all that much you can do turns 1 and 2 except netting a bunker, banishing, a chaff unit, whatever. So it's really important with this lore, I think, to have a level 2 Skink Priest as a caster with something they can do the first couple turns. Comet becomes really nice because you only really want to cast Comet the first 2 turns anyway, so if you roll Comet on a skink, this is the amazing combination. This is the lore I always swap to when I run High Magic, because, I mean, that's a really good synergy for me, because High Magic's got a lot of stuff you only want to do the first 2 turns, and then you can swap everything to Light. However, I'll talk more about that in my upcoming High Magic video, because High Magic is so complicated. I really need to do a whole video for it. But yeah, I give this lore a 5. It's absolutely outstanding for Lizardmen. Probably the only army it's that outstanding for, but it really is that good. Next up is Wandering Deliberations. This one I personally never tried. I understand the appeal, it's just not how I like to play Magic phases. Basically, the strategy with this one is you just 2 dice, a bunch of different spells, and you get everything off you can. Teto Echo is pretty nice with this one, because you can even risk 1 dicing everything with Teto, because you can reroll 1s, and if you get that 3 for a spell to go off, any one of, I think the only spell out of all the signatures that needs higher than that is Wissons. You don't really have any useless spells. Earthblood's kind of bad, but other than that, you've got a nice toolbox kit. The one problem is you don't really have any big power spells, which is why this usually works better with a second caster like Teto Echo or something. So at least you have like Comet and such. So I can't really talk too much about this because, I've never used it, but this is for more the nickel and diming toolbox type player. Finally, we have Lore of High Magic, and this is our new one in the book. This really takes some getting used to. Hopefully by now you've gotten used to it because the book did come out in September. I am going to do an entire Tactica video on this lore, and I could probably talk for an hour of all the different ways you can use it. There's some great spells in this lore. There's some not so great spells, but then there's where it's not. The reason you take this lore is for the lore tribute, which allows you to swap a spell after you successfully cast it and it was not dispelled at the end of a magic phase. I know there's some people are confused on that, where they think you can swap right after you cast and then cast the swap spell in the same magic phase. You do the swapping at the end of the phase, so you have to think a turn ahead to use this lore correctly. You always have to be thinking at least 1 turn ahead. You have to know. Often you have to think more than that ahead, because you have to predict whether or not you'll need a spell later in the game. I have run into some situations where I'll cast Fiery Convocation, swap it, and then something will happen where I would really, really, really like to have that spell back again, or same thing with Arcane and Forging, or whatever, but so this is probably the hardest spell lore to use correctly. Light and Death being the easiest, because Light you just bubble out your buffs, and Death you just, snipe characters in Doom and Darkness, whatever your salamanders are about to shoot at. This one, you really have to be planning out the entire game. It really requires thinking ahead between, not marching with your salamander because you're planning on walking worlding them and they can get a shot off, knowing when you're going to need the spell, knowing when you're going to need to swap for stuff. This is my favorite choice just because it allows so much flexibility, especially in tournaments where you don't know you're going to fight. And you can swap to, you ran into that Troll Horde, swap everything to Fire Magic. You ran into the Demon Prince with Chimera and Friends, swap to Metal and Death, etc. But so this is my favorite lore. I give it a 5+. 8 spells, swapping between every lore. It's the power of the Slann. This is what they're meant to be. Knowing basically every spell in the world. But I'm going to have to do a whole Tactica video on this. But so look out for that, and I'll talk in more detail about this one. Okay, in review, the skinks, which lore you take on a skink really depends on which lore you took on your Slann. If you took, High Magic, where you need every dice you can possibly get on your Slann, you really want to take Heavens and a level 1 skink. If you took something like a Light, or maybe even Death, you really want to take Beasts so that you can have, some extra utility there. But really, these are the only 5 choices I see for lore for Slann. It's either Death, Light, or one of our 2 unique ones. Other than any, if you want to pick any of the other 6 options, you really need to have a specific reason and a specific plan on what you're doing with it. Either, have absolutely nothing to deal with high toughness or high armor, so you want Shadow, have ways to deal with toughness, but not like those 1-up armor saves, so you absolutely need metal. The problem is a lot of those army-specific choices, you really need to have a reason to have the whole lore instead of just a specific thing, because otherwise, just take high magic and swap to it. Some people don't think swapping can be that consistent, but if you build your Slann right and you're careful with how you cast spells, you can consistently swap about 4 spells per game. I usually end up swapping more than that, but I really have gotten it down how to sneak spells through that they don't worry about dispelling. I've also had it where the first 2 phases of a game I rolled like 3 power dice and I got completely screwed because I got stuck with high magic when I went into combat. But these are really the 4 choices that I would pick from, unless you have a specific build, a specific reason you absolutely have to choose one of the other lores. This is basically what I see as our lore choices. Alright, so I guess that's the end of it. Let me know what you think, and I will be coming to you soon, hopefully later this week, with a high magic tactical video.